And on the second panel today, we have the Honorable Mike McGinn, who is the mayor of the city of Seattle. Okay. Yeah. We have Mr. Ross Eisenberg, who's the Vice President, Energy and Resources Policy for the National Association of Manufacturers. We have Mr. Harold Quinn, President and CEO, National Mining Association. Mr. Casey Golden, Policy Director for Climate Solutions. We have Mr. Bill Cooper, President of the Center for Liquefied Natural Gas. And we have Mr. Lucian Pularasi, President for the Energy Policy Research Foundation. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony on this important subject matter. And each one of you will be given 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then I'm sure that there will be some questions from members as they come back in. So thank you for joining us, and Mr. McGinn, we'll call on you for your opening statement to begin with, and each one of you will be given 5 minutes, and as I said earlier, there is a little box that if it's working, is it working? If it's working, a red light will come on, but we look forward to your testimony. Mr. McGinn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Upton. It's a
I'm
real
sorry,
honor.
I should say Mayor McGinn.
That's anything works. Chairman, thank you for the invitation to testify. It's a real honor to be here. A long time ago, when my hair wasn't gray and my beard was red, I worked for Congressman Jim Weaver of Oregon, over there in the Longworth office building. And Northwest politics often involve energy. Congressman Weaver was deeply involved in championing conservation as opposed to new nuclear power plants at that time. And conservation was indeed the wiser choice. The Whoops nuclear power plants, which were endorsed by Congress, ended up defaulting on billions of dollars on municipal bonds. We now face another significant energy choice for the Pacific Northwest, one that could have dramatic consequences for our economic and environmental well-being. Whether 110 million tons of coal a year will be transported across the Northwest and shipped to China from Northwest ports. To put that in perspective, the carbon emissions from that coal are more than the emissions projected from the Keystone XL pipeline. So I want to describe this just a little bit. To ship this coal to China, terminals are proposed north of Bellingham, Washington, near Longview, Washington, as well as in Oregon, and British Columbia is looking at coal ports as well. To ship this coal, we'd be looking at, to get to Bellingham, we'd be looking at 18 coal trains a day, each 1.5 miles to 2 miles long, traveling from the Powder River Basin in Montana and Wyoming through Spokane in eastern Washington, down the length of the Columbia River, the border between Oregon and Washington, and then from south to north, almost to the northwest corner of the state in Bellingham, traversing multiple towns and traveling along the Puget Sound coastline. The coal trains are uncovered. They lose approximately 2% of their load on the route. The proposed coal terminal near Bellingham sits on ancestral Native American lands and is opposed by the Lummi Nation, both because it violates their burial grounds and because coal pollution in Puget Sound threatens their salmon rights, and those are treaty rights. I tell this story because the local impacts of coal trains upon communities throughout Washington are significant. Over 40 local elected officials, including tribal leaders, have joined me in a leadership alliance against coal because of the serious negative impacts on their communities. And I'd like to talk about that. Coal train traffic will clog the railroads. Coal dust and diesel exhaust from the engines pollute water and lungs. Neighborhoods along the rail line will see decreased quality of life. And it will have significant negative transportation impacts. I ask you to consider the impacts upon communities as these coal trains go through. In Seattle, in our industrial area, we have 4 at-grade crossings, and then we have 4 at-grade crossings between our downtown and our waterfront. Each of these areas are significant job-creating areas in their own right, and in order for freight traffic to reach our port, they have to go across these rail lines. We worked with a consulting firm, Parametrics, to take a close look. And we were talking about increased gate downtime up to 2 to 3 hours each day. That has economic impacts as well as public safety impacts upon our police and fire departments. Now imagine that impact on cities and towns along the entire route. These railroad lines tend to go right through the middles of towns at grade. And then let's take a look again at just the broader impacts. We've spoken about the climate impacts already. This is equivalent to all the gasoline burned by 50 million people each year. Now, unless we stop these coal terminals from being built, we will be responsible for hastening the advance of climate change here at home and around the world. Now, I've heard members of this group talk quite a bit about jobs. I just want to say we've been working really hard in Seattle to recover from the recession caused by lax oversight of our financial institutions in this country. And we're creating jobs. We're building the greenest buildings in the world. We're retrofitting buildings, and those are local jobs. You have to be in that crawl space. You have to be operating those energy control systems. We've been eliminating waste, putting the money we save to productive use. That's frugal. That's efficient. And that's reducing demand for our clean wind and water power, which means we can put that electricity to better use in our economy. In fact, we should be exporting our green building technology, not coal. In fact, we are. Our architects are building buildings in China and all over the world because they're some of the leading architects in the world. Now, I want to return to the issue of the Whoops nuclear power plants that I mentioned at the beginning. We somehow have this belief that economic growth requires ever-increasing amounts of energy use. We proved that to be wrong in the Northwest. We have had significant economic growth while reducing our energy use. We've grown by being more efficient and cleaner, enhancing our quality of life. That's the pathway to creating good jobs. The same is true with coal trains. They'll hurt us economically. We have better ways to create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor McGinn.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you have used your time to let your feelings be known. I think we understand or know how you feel now. But I want to formulate my questions on a different kind of path. In the first panel, I talked a lot about jobs and the cost of doing business, and on the prices that the American people will be confronted with. So I'd like to ask each of you, since you're on the front line, the question of what would be the net impact on prices, on jobs, from your perspective, if we were to export LNG and coal. And notwithstanding the treatise from my friend from Kentucky, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, I would like to know, do you have any concerns about climate change also, and what are those concerns? So, Mr. McGinn, if you would just start, what would be the net impact on prices and jobs for the American people?
Well, I think we look at clearly there are jobs in the production and transport of coal and the shipping of it, but we look at the impact on our economic activities in our cities and towns along the length of that train route, and we see negative impacts. You also have the health impacts. For example, 200 doctors in Bellingham spoke about the impacts of diesel exhaust and coal dust on people living near an export facility. We know in particular those can hit some of our minority communities harder who live closer to those train tracks or closer to the facilities. I mentioned the Lummi Indians' concern, who have lived for centuries on salmon, and their concern about the effects on salmon. So we see all of the positive economic activity in Seattle and our region, and the coal trains concern us. And of course we're worried about climate change, because what we do is we export the coal and it comes back to us in the form of mercury emissions, which find their way into fish and find their way into all of our bodies. Comes back in the form of global warming, which has potentially devastating effects on our economy and quality of life. And that's why we, again, keep pointing to what we believe are more productive ways to create jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor McGinn, you described a number of ways in which a new coal export terminal could affect local communities. And you further developed that with the ranker on the committee, Representative Rush. What are the city and state doing to examine and quantify the potential impact of increased coal train traffic on air quality? Is there anything being done in that regard?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One is a local University of Washington researcher is doing research on both the effects of the coal dust and diesel exhaust along the route. That requires setting up monitoring stations along the length of the route to understand the impacts. And he actually ended up crowdsourcing the funding for that. He was concerned that he wouldn't be able to get it from traditional sources, but he is doing that work. There's the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is our regional planning agency for transportation and economic purposes, is looking at a region-wide analysis of that would be the 4 counties that comprise it, which are around central Puget Sound. So those are 2 of the analyses that are underway right now, and we're also looking at a health impacts analysis as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Eisenberg's testimony directly challenges the merits of your request for a comprehensive programmatic environmental review of all of the coal terminal proposals. And I believe the witness argues that assessing the environmental impacts of each terminal on its own should be deemed adequate. And we heard from Ms. Moyer from the Army Corps of Engineers with a similar viewpoint in her testimony. Why do you think it's important to examine all of the terminal proposals together rather than individually?
Well, it's embedded within the National Environmental Protection Act and our State Environmental Protection Act that you should look before you leap. You should understand the impacts of a decision before making it. We've clearly identified a wide range of impacts along the entire length of the line. I think the question that was raised by Ms. Castor was right on point. Shouldn't some agency of government be evaluating all of the impacts, including, of course, the cumulative impacts that come from climate change? So I do not believe the decision of the Army Corps of Engineers should be allowed to stand. If we're going to understand the implications of this decision, we need to look at all the impacts. And I would say that both the governors of Oregon and Washington have made the same request.
Thank you. And
now the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, when's your election coming up? Don't you have something coming up soon?
Yes, it is indeed. This August is a primary. This November is a general.
So this makes a good photo op here, doesn't it? Mayor, I've got a couple questions for you. When I read through your testimony, because it seemed like maybe you left some things out that you had talked about. One is you referenced, and maybe I didn't hear it right because I don't hear as well as I should, but on page 4 you talk about on mining leases on public lands that there is in your words, a massive subsidy for coal companies. I've got a copy of the report, and I haven't found the word subsidy in there at all. Can you tell me where I would find that word subsidy that you're referring to?
You know, and I think this goes back to the issue that the chairman was talking about.
Can you just tell me where it is?
Well, if you will, it goes back to this issue the chairman was talking about whether the marketplace, is letting this go.
These are sealed bids, are they not, Mayor? And they don't have to reject. They can accept them or reject them. There's no check. There's no subsidy to these companies, and you know that. This is just a matter of someone that you didn't like the bids that were received with that. But I'm more troubled. With.
Here's your testifying now, Congressman, and it's your committee.
You're challenging me on the thing, and that's, Mayor, you're here before us.
I understand that, and I appreciate the opportunity.
On page 3, you had more troubling, and I thought it sent a shiver up my spine. and it should for anyone from a coal-producing area, when you said on page 3 that we should keep our coal in the ground where it belongs. Did you really mean that?
Yes, I did.
That we shouldn't be mining or using coal in America?
Well, this gets us to the fundamental issue of climate change, and this is the difference between corn and toys and the other things that were mentioned. The difference here is that we have taken huge quantities of fossil fuels from beneath the surface of the earth and put them into the atmosphere with potentially devastating effects upon the future of us and future generations as well.
You're entitled to have that opinion about climate change. It's throughout there. I'm willing to acknowledge that there is climate change going on. The question I'm still trying to determine as an engineer, I'm one of 2 engineers in Congress, is whether or not the climate change is caused by man or is it natural and cyclical. We can come to the agreement that it's changing. We know that. But you seem to be saying to so many on the other side that it's all due to man and burning coal or fossil fuels, and that just simply does. That's why there's an ongoing debate with it, and you're coming from your position. But with all due respect, you coming here and trying to lecture us about climate change, Mayor, I would strongly suggest you take a look at the crime rate in Seattle.
I'd be happy to look.
When you have 94% of the cities across America have a lower crime rate than you have in that city.
Well, that's actually
3,707 violent crimes in your community and 33,248 last year with it. I think you ought to take a look at it.
We have one of the lowest crime rates of a large city in the country, and we are at a 30-year low for our crime rate, Congressman.
Yield back.
And we're proud of our police force and the work they do fighting crime.
Gentlemen, yield back. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Quinn.